All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. So we're just going to give everyone a few seconds to join us on the stage today. Get familiar with Goldcast and join us. So we can see some people coming into this session, the webinar today. So just get familiar with the controls, get comfortable. For the next half an hour, we're going to go through IBM Audit Readiness. And for those that have just joined us as well, so we're going to have Q&A at the end of the session today. So if there's any pressing questions about your IBM Audit Readiness, please drop them in the chat. We will address them at the end of the session today. We'll be there to answer those questions for you. I'm joined today by Toby, who's going to cover off all the details that I can't. He's one of our experts around the IBM topics. So today there is no surprises, no setbacks. So it's a topic that we're really keen to bring into the team across APAC today. So we're really looking at how do we actually prep for an audit. We want to make sure that we're right sizing the investment in the technologies that we're consuming, and IBM is no different to the likes of the Microsofts, the Oracles, the Adobes, and so we want to make sure that if you do get the audit letter, or you're really just prepping and planning and being proactive throughout the year, it's you leveraging the Flexera technology to get those outcomes for you, right-sizing the investment on technology that you're consuming and owning. So we want to make sure that we're investing in things that you actually need, that you actually own, and you're actually using. So today's all about that and some guidance around how we get to those outcomes. So for those that have joined us maybe for the first time, this is a series of webinars that we've run over the course of last year and this year. So the 8 on screen in front of you summarize the topics that we've covered during that time frame. So if you're keen to learn a little bit more about those, Ash will actually put those links into the chat for you today. And you can look at those on demand and actually consume that content whenever you feel is appropriate. So some great content previously to catch up on. So just looking ahead, so today, 22nd of April, is all about IBM and audit readiness. So we're going to dive into what triggers an audit, or the proactiveness and preparedness around an audit. Look at some of the fundamentals. So Toby's going to take us through the fundamentals of what it means to go through and be prepared for an audit, some of the gotchas, some of the things that you need to be very mindful about, the passport advantage contracts, how to get that into the system, and really dive into the dynamics of a very complex IT environment. In May, we've had a bit of a change in the schedule that we were originally planning for those that have joined us last month, but we're going to dive into vulnerabilities and patching. So a very interesting topic about how to see the risks that others miss in terms of the vulnerability estate and what you should be looking out for, and where maybe CVEs aren't really up to scratch anymore, and where Flexera can help. And we pushed what was in May into June around proving ITAM value. And once again, we'll be joined by some other colleagues of ours to really drive into where we can help around that value discovery, understanding how to really talk about ITAM at the executive level. So keep an eye out for those, keep an eye out for the links on LinkedIn, and please register your interest across those 3. All right, so today we're going to dive in specifically around IT asset management. Now, for those that have been through other sessions, we've really touched on a number of different, capabilities of the Flexera One portfolio here. And today is really about IT asset management and narrowing down. It may touch on some other elements, but really 99% of what we're doing is focusing on the data that we collect and present within IT asset management, and looking at the contracts and the entitlements that you own and how to attribute those or how to assign those out within the environment. So today we're going to focus in just on that particular green square in front of you. Now, as always, I do like to start these sessions with, placing us at the center of the world. So really, we're at that tipping point of technology spend, and technology is only really ever, second to people spend within an organization. So that technology spend is something that we're competing for budgets with against people, but that technology spend is also increasing year on year. Where we start to look at, IBM and other vendors out there, there's more and more investment in terms of technology spend being a business enabler. Now, over the last 3 years in particular, around 47 and 51% on cloud and SaaS spend, we see that growth throughout the market, whether that's on-premise, in SaaS or in cloud. And this market is growing rapidly. So we need to make sure that we're in control of spend within our technology landscape. Now, just to touch on those market trends, and if we start to look at the topic today, now where the SAM market in particular is focused, and we start to look at a number of different key areas, and one of those surveys and state of ITAM in particular here was addressing what SAM focus responsibilities does your ITAM team have. And really, at the end of the day, is as much as the market has changed with SaaS being a lack of compliance or non-compliance focused space, and particularly with cloud as well, most organizations are still worried about audits and those audits being top of mind. And these are just exercises that software vendors do to make sure that you're in compliance of software that you're actually using from them. So the goal for us is, not to think of these as scary events that happen to penalize you as the end customer, but these things are really the vehicle in which we actually want to ensure that we're shoring up to the amount that we need to spend for the things that we're actually using. And also as well, an opportunity for you to right size what you're using to spend what you need with those software vendors. Now, over the last 3 years in particular, this survey, the results actually show us that how much have you spent, or how much do you estimate your organization has spent on software vendor audits? And it's still substantial. The effort involved, the running around, the weeks of effort to respond to the audits. And that's, in most cases, completely unnecessary when you have a system in place to proactively manage that. And this is where today's Toby's going to steer us towards how do we be proactive in managing IBM, and so we don't have to worry about any audits to come through or the annual event of going through the renewal. Now, really, why focus on IBM? There's a couple key reasons, but at the end of the day is IBM is still auditing and second on this list only after Microsoft. So when we start to look at this, we want to make sure that we have a positive and collaborative relationship with IBM. And if we're going to be the second most audited software vendor, we want to make sure that we're meeting them halfway in terms of the information that we're bringing to the table, the investment that we're making with IBM. So this is where we want to drive that success with them. And now Toby's going to take us through the IBM environment risk profile and take us through what it means to be prepared with IBM, being proactive and using Flexera to do that. So over to you, Toby.
Thank you, Nathan. Hi. So in terms of the IBM risk profiles, you can see on the screen here, we've got simple, moderate, complex, and high risk. Simple representing few products, physical servers, full capacity licensing. So a simple environment. And then obviously down to high risk, where we've got mergers and acquisitions, organizational changes, lap support, lack of reporting, and no ILMT. So the example here is high risk being lots of change, no proactive reporting, no management, no data. Now, what we've got on the next slide is a breakdown into the details for these high risk to medium to low scenarios in terms of the risk profile. So if we just talk through kind of each of these different areas, the IBM expectations, the gaps, and the risk level that relates to these. So firstly, IBM has a number of different contractual reporting requirements that are required. And so from a risk profile perspective, if we do not have all of the reporting requirements being conducted regularly and per the terms, obviously that raises the risk profile from an audit perspective. I think it's worth calling out that from an audit perspective, the audits are likely to be either commercially based or risk based, or a bit of both. Now, what you'll find is that IBM won't state any particular single reason for why you are being audited, but it's commonly the case that it's either that there's been an event or multiple events that have raised the risk profile, suggesting that maybe certain products or licenses are not being well managed, that we don't have necessary reporting or other information. Or it could be commercially based, that there's indications that you're intending not to renew as much software, or it could simply be time based, that you haven't had an audit in a period of time. And it's important, as Nathan called out, that audits are a right of IBM, as part of your contract. So it's important that we consider all of this. Now, in terms of the areas that we see on the screen here, so ILMT deployment. So this is for subcapacity reporting requirements. So Flexera is an eligible replacement for this, and we'll touch on that in a bit later. But the expectation is that you have a subcapacity reporting tool installed, and on all of your subcapacity eligible systems, so those devices that are running IBM subcapacity software. So the common gap is that you don't have ILMT or ITAM or FNMS appropriately configured to gather your data, and the result of that is that you then, as a risk, would be open to being required to pay for full capacity license requirements. So rather than licensing the virtualized cores, you need to license the physical cores and the license associated to those. The other area is the reports themselves. So there is a requirement that you need to take. It says on the screen here monthly. That's the IBM recommendation. At a minimum, it needs to be quarterly reporting requirements, and you need to keep these for 2 years. I have unfortunately been involved in some audits where reports have not been retained for 2 years, and this then does invalidate the subcapacity terms and opens yourselves as an organization up to questions around full capacity license requirements, what data is missing and why is it missing. So the key gap here is we want to try to ensure that we do not have any missing snapshots, missing reports, to make sure that we have a constant history of your peak license consumption for the period of at least 2 years per the terms. Hardware topology. So this is about making sure that we've got accurate and complete inventory data effectively. Do we see the right CPU core counts? Do we have the right virtualization information? So if we're missing counts and we're missing information, we could be miscalculating your subcapacity licenses or your core-based device-based licenses. It's worth noting that from a hardware perspective, if you're using Flexera in replacement, there is a requirement to use our agent, and again we'll dive into that in a later slide in a moment. The other aspect here is in terms of bring your own license to cloud. So again, this relates partly to the hardware topology, which is around bringing that inventory data in, having visibility of what is in your cloud environments. So IBM has bring your own license policies for eligible public cloud environments. They define how many vCPUs equate to PVU requirements, etc. But we need to ensure that we have, a Flexera agent or another inventory source, if relevant, for another tool such as ILMT, gathering the data in those environments so that you have visibility of what is running in your cloud environment so that you can count the license consumption appropriately. If we don't have agent inventory in the cloud, we don't have visibility of what's running on those cloud devices, we can't count the appropriate license consumption. The next line is containerized IBM software. So you can, for the last few years at least, IBM has been offering containerized IBM licensing. But the requirement here, and this is a key differentiator, and I'll be very transparent about this, Flexera today is not an eligible replacement for the IBM license service. In fact, the IBM license service is the only technology that IBM allow for subcapacity license reporting in containers. But Flexera does have an out-of-the-box integration to the IBM license service. So if you do not have the IBM license service deployed and managed to track and report your container instances, the risk is that you need to license all of the cores in that cluster. So that physical level. Now, IBM is more actively pursuing this, and unfortunately what I do see in my experience as a services consultant is that we get involved in some customers, and we'll have a conversation with certain areas of the team, and they'll say, I think we are starting to use containers, or I'm not sure if we're using containers. And unfortunately what we then find usually in further conversations is that there are many. I have one French customer. I was involved in one call, and they said, we think we've got maybe 3,000. It's in its infancy. I was in a later call and transpired they had 75,000 containers, and it was growing rapidly. So this is an area that we need to ensure is being managed, and you need to make sure that you have the IBM license service being deployed where you have IBM software running in containers, and we want to make sure that that's integrated with the Flexera solution so that we see the detail. Entitlements, proof of purchase. So this is around understanding what you've actually bought, what you're entitled to. And this is making sure that you've got good records of, all of the details of what you procured, under which PA site numbers, so the sites, your Passport Advantage sites, any license keys and, S&S, your maintenance renewal records, having all of that detail. So you've got a good, clear understanding of this is what we're entitled to. This is what we have. I think it's important to call out that unfortunately, in some cases, I do get involved in customers where we have a look at their current agreement and we have a look at their Passport Advantage purchase documentation, and it doesn't always align. So I think it's important to make sure that you do try and keep track of what you believe you are entitled to. If you think PA doesn't accurately represent what is in your current signed contract, obviously it's good to call that out, but it's good that you're aware of that. So if there is an audit, you can call that out straight away and not rely just on what the auditor provides as this is your entitlement. Deployment inventory. So this is around having that complete inventory of your estate. If we are missing inventory, we're missing parts of your estate, we don't see certain devices, that has an impact, obviously, because if we're only looking at 70% of your estate, it might be that the license position is only 70% accurate, or maybe less. Maybe that's a heavily deployed IBM area, or it's a low deployed area, but it represents a known unknown. So we need to make sure that we're inventorying that part of the estate. The other part as well in terms of inventory is that while our agent, from a Flexera perspective, can identify all the hardware attributes about a device and the software that's running on a device, our agent can't gather information that tells us if the device is being used for development or test purposes, as an example. So this is where we usually would want the Flexera toolset, as an example, to be integrated with a CMDB that can tell us this is a warm, cold standby device, this is development, this is test, or this is production, as an example. And we can use that information to optimize licenses as well. The other risk profile area here is user-based licensing. So it's important to understand that IBM has different definitions for user-based licenses, and there's different user-based licenses that IBM offer. You can have authorized user, user value unit, concurrent user, floating user, etc. A lot of the user-based license terms require, every user with both direct and indirect access to consume a license. Now, from a Flexera and other software licensing technology, in many cases, what you would see is the user of a device that has the software installed, and we can count that. So that's more likely the direct access, as an example. But the common gaps can be that you might have shared logins. I was involved in one customer where we had, the marketing team as a joint account that had access to the software. Per the terms, everybody in that marketing team would need a license, the indirect access. So it's important that you have an understanding of what your user-based licenses are, the terms for those user-based licenses. Is it authorized user single install, or is it authorized user, and the differences between these? And making sure that you're able to gather the data so who is both directly or indirectly accessing that software. You also want to be aware of any specific terms where it might be that computing devices that have access to the software may also require a license. So again, it's important that you read the license terms for your user-based licenses. The risk here is that obviously if we're not counting certain users, that if they're identified under audit, like the marketing team example, your consumption can actually obviously expand quite significantly if you're not aware of some of those. And then we've got license, your model documentation, the license terms. So this is around, have an understanding of the different license types that you've got, understanding how that mapping might need to be applied. It's important to call out that you can buy software licenses from IBM under multiple different metrics. I have customers where they've got a terabyte license in one part of their estate, and they've got a PVU or a subcapacity license in another part of their estate. So it's important to understand what you've bought and where it's intended to be used. In many cases, the software installs from a pure inventory perspective might look the same. Thank you. So in terms of the next part here, so this is a screen snip from the IBM Passport Advantage. So this covers the reporting requirements from an IBM Passport Advantage perspective. So, point A here for license verification. So this is audit. So the client annually, so yourselves as customers of IBM, you would provide a report for all deployed, programs in a format equivalent to the template that they provide a link for, and you would retain this information for a minimum of 2 years. And upon request from IBM, you would provide this within 30 days. So that's one part of the requirement. So the key point here is that there is a now active or proactive requirement from IBM for all of their customers to start tracking and managing and keeping records of all of their consumption, at least on a yearly basis for all programs. Now, what's important to call out is that in addition to this, you have your quarterly or recommended monthly IBM subcapacity reporting requirements as well. And you still need to keep the data from those for a minimum of 2 years in addition. So the second part is that upon reasonable request, IBM and its independent auditors may, verify your compliance at all sites and for all environments. Now, the key point here is it calls out, verification may be conducted on your premises during normal business hours, and it does, indicate that they want to minimize disruption. Don't necessarily want to talk particularly badly about IBM, but I would suggest that from experience, while they will try to minimize disruption, it will be disruptive, and it can last for some time depending on the size and the scale of your estate. Now, the final part here that's really relevant and a key driver for why we want to, one of the key drivers for why we want to ensure proactive management as well, is point C. So if you are found to be non-compliant, you will promptly order and pay at IBM's then current prices, so this can be list price, for any deployments that are in excess of your authorizations. And you can be expected to pay up to 2 years worth of back maintenance if you can't defend or be able to prove when that excess first started. And there can be additional charges as well in terms of tax and duties and fees. So the key point here is we want proactive management so that, one, we can have an understanding of what you've bought and what you're consuming, so you can go into negotiations and renewals on the front foot to be able to say, this is what we've got, this is what we're consuming. We know we can reduce our requirements. We know maybe in 6 months' time, actually, we are intending to start consuming more. So, let's consider this as part of the renewal, whatever it might be. But also so that you're aware if there are risks, how those can be managed, and aware of the risk value that you might need to pay if identified under audit because of this term here. Okay, so how to be proactive around IBM. So, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the key point here is proactive management. So this is around trying to make sure that we get, everything in line, so that if an audit takes place, you're as prepared as you can be. And equally, that preparation then also enables you, as part of your proactive management, to be on, the best position for commercial negotiations and renewals, and to be ready and prepared if there is any requirements for a it's just seeing your lights go. If there's any preparation and requirements for as part of a renewal, how you would manage that scenario. So first part here is, the high level summary is we want to make sure that you can explain what you've got in terms of your entitlement, what you're consuming and how it's licensed, so that you know if you are non-compliant, if you are compliant, if you have some excess entitlement and that general scenario, and also so that you are in a position that you know that you can provide the relevant contractual reporting requirements and keep that data stored and retained. So in terms of point 1, so centralize your entitlements. This is where we want to make sure we gather all of your contracts and your purchase records. We want to clean those, make sure, clean being, if there is any errors or inconsistencies in some of the data you see from Passport Advantage, we want to make sure that the relevant, cleaned, correct data is loaded into ITAM. From this, we want to then create the relevant licenses. to make sure that we've got the right license types and metrics, and to have any contractual and environment restrictions considered. So what does this mean? So if you've bought licenses which IBM does sell, or separately on a non-production license basis, we want to make sure that we create those. We're aware that these are only to be used for non-production environments, and then as part point 3, which we'll come on to in a minute, how we want to make sure that we configure those. So for point 2, we've then got inventory all deployments. So this is where we want to make sure that we're seeing everything. So IBM has contractual requirements that you should have, in theory, purchased your licenses prior to deployment. So we need to make sure that we're scanning all of your environments to make sure that we're aware of what is deployed on these devices, and that if software is deployed on these devices in the future, that we have visibility of these. So this is where we need to make sure that we have inventory for your on-premise devices, for your cloud devices, virtual environments, to a certain extent, if relevant from a SaaS perspective. We also containers in relation to the IBM license service. Now, in addition to this, we also need business data, that context. So as part of this, we want to ensure that we've got the full Flexera inventory agent deployed to all relevant IBM devices, or all devices that could host IBM software in the future. We want to make sure that we have the IBM license service integrated to bring in and ingest your container data. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't also deploy the Flexera Kubernetes inventory agent. That can provide a really good insight into actually what is running in your containers. Fortunately, we don't have time today to go into details regarding ILS, but it requires you to tag your containers. If you don't tag things, it doesn't show, but the Flexera Kubernetes inventory agent will at least give you visibility into what is on those. We got frequent inventory scanning. So this is a requirement where we need to make sure, this is like ILMT, we're having to follow their requirements here from an ILMT perspective. This is where we need to scan devices every 30 minutes. Now, in terms of the business data, this is because IBM have regional reporting requirements. We need to follow the sun, track peak license consumption. So as part of this, we want to make sure that devices, if you're a global organization, are associated to relevant locations, and those locations are tied to IBM regions, North and South America, Europe and Africa, Asia and Australia. We'll also want to make sure that we bring in device roles. So is the device production? Is it development? Is it test? And these device roles can be configured in the ITAM tool so that we can say this is a development, this is a test device, so that if we have a requirement to count production or count non-production licenses separately, we can use that role-based information to automate what consumes your non-production license and what consumes your production. Validate the licensing configuration. So we want to make sure that once you've got your purchase data in, and in parallel you've been bringing your inventory data in, we also want to validate the license configuration. So this is where we want to make sure that we've reviewed your IBM commercial unlicensed installs. So as part of you entering your purchase data in and processing it, the Flexera tool contains libraries that help pre-configure licenses with the appropriate use rights and rules. Do we have the right to upgrade? Do we have the right to downgrade? Do we have the right for unlimited installations on the same device? Can we exclude cold and warm standby? Certain scenarios like this. But it might be the case that we still find IBM commercial installs, so installs that we believe from a content perspective would require a license, that are not currently associated to a license. Now, it could be that, there could be a requirement that you need to add them into one of the existing licenses that you've created. It could be that it's been installed as part of a trial and not removed. It could be that it's commercial IBM software that has been purchased, but that purchase detail hasn't been entered into the tool yet. You haven't created a license. So we want to review and manage those. It's important we manage those because those will be included in reports that you extract and save from the ITAM tool, which will be visible to auditors. So we want to make sure that we manage those. How are we going to be proactive around IBM kind of continue forward? So then we've got proactively fix gaps. So if we find that you've got unauthorized installs, so we're finding installations that are unlicensed, we find no relevant software licenses that they can be associated with, how do we manage that scenario? What do we want to link them to? If we can link them to anything, is it the case that actually they're no longer required? We want to remove them as part of a housekeeping exercise. Is it the case that we can that they are required, and that maybe you don't have a license for them. They were installed as part of a trial. It may be the case, additional licenses are required. In terms of assessing and managing non-eligible virtualization technology, this is a key requirement that you should be aware of. So the Flexera toolset will count subcapacity licenses where we have the Flexera inventory agent gathering the data. So we can see, the subcapacity, the virtual core counts. But IBM does have a requirement that we should count license consumption from a full capacity basis if the software is running on non-eligible virtualization technology. Now, IBM define and update that technology over time, but as an example, Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2012 would be non-eligible. Now, you can see this information within the IBM subcapacity reports within the Flexera tool, but I am being transparent that the Flexera tool today doesn't make a big thing of calling that out. So the recommendation is that you just want to go in, have a look. If you see in your peak, IBM subcapacity license consumption that you are running some very old operating systems, that there may be risks. Now, the reports do show both the sub and the full capacity calculations for these. So you will, have very clear visibility of what those risks could be. Obviously, the recommendation is that you look to upgrade the operating system, because I'm sure there's other reasons for concern beyond just your subcapacity licensing if you're running a 2008 operating system. But then we've got control the audit process. So if an audit does start, we want to make sure that we assign a single point of contact so that we don't have the auditors and the audit team reaching out to different areas of the business. We want to kind of keep that contained. We want to make sure that there's legal reviews and NDAs. So they will have their own NDAs. You, I'm sure, may have your own NDAs. I'm not saying that this is a relevant or useful way that you can extend or delay providing information, but certainly you want to make sure that the NDAs are up to scratch for your requirements. You'll also want to ensure that the audit scope is defined in writing. Now, this can be because in some cases your enterprise agreements may have additional audit terms, verification terms, I should say, above and beyond what's in the Passport Advantage agreements. So it is important that you understand those. In some cases, it might be that the audit can't be rerun for a period of time, as an example. So it's really important that you define that scope, especially if you're a large global organization or you're an organization that has multiple IBM PA sites. The key point here is to provide reports and not system access. So within the Flexera tool, you can obviously extract the reports and provide those. If you grant system access, it's not particularly easy unless you've kind of set the system up from the start to limit access only to data relevant just for IBM. And obviously the Flexera toolset is designed to help you manage your Oracle, as well as IBM, your Microsoft, others, etc. And we then want to maintain ongoing SAM governance. So this is where it's not just about getting ready for the audit, it's about making sure that you've got that proactive management. So this is where we want to conduct regular internal license checks, do mock audits as an example. We want to make sure that month in, month out, you are gathering your relevant consumption data, both for those licenses that are automatically updated within the Flexera tool, in which case you would see up-to-date information on a daily basis. But there are licenses where the Flexera tool will maybe only gather partial license consumption automatically, or it might require entirely manual consumption. It could be that the licensing is based on the capital asset value of the business. You would need to make sure that that information is gathered and entered into the tool and updated to make sure it's accurate and relevant. So how does Flexera help solve IBM complexity? So firstly, we're an IBM-authorised tooling. So you will see, the Flexera IT Asset Management toolset represented on the IBM website. So providing you make use of the Flexera inventory agents and you have frequent inventory scanning enabled. So we're gathering that data regularly to make sure that there's been no changes from a core perspective to increase or have an influence on your peak license consumption. You can use Flexera in replacement of ILMT. Now, there are differences between the positive differences between the Flexera toolset and ILMT, one of them being contracts and entitlement data. So within the Flexera tool, we can represent your contract and your entitlement. If you have some legacy perpetual IBM licenses that you have only partially maintained going forward, we can still represent those licenses. We can retire them. We can prevent them from consuming until such a time that you stop maintenance on your other licenses. But the key point is we can represent your entitlement. So within the Flexera tool, we can see what you've bought and what you're consuming, that effective license position. Now, your purchase data can be ingested into the tool via many methods. We've got a standard import template. We have a Passport Advantage document ingestion capability. That it works well, but as I said, I would be careful just to make sure that the data in that document that you ingest from the Passport Advantage site does accurately reflect what's in your current contracts. Otherwise, maybe clean that data and place that into the standard template. We've also got, an AI-based ingestion tool. So this is where you can gather your new purchase data and ingest that into the tool. We've got Cloud Pak license consumption counting capability. So this is where we can represent Cloud Paks, your virtual processor core Cloud Pak requirements. We can define different ratios per products and counts the license consumption within the one license. These licenses are pre-configured when you process a purchase with the relevant SKU. So you will see, MQ, App Connect, others all being represented within the Cloud Pak and the relevant ratios associated to those. License optimization. So again, when you process purchases with SKUs or use certain license models when creating your licenses, you will see license templates being created and configured so it knows you have the rights to upgrade, the right to downgrade, the rights of multiple use. You'll have other configuration set, cold and warm standby can be excluded, and other information. Data normalization and enrichment. So a key point here is that Flexera has got a very complete application recognition library, the ARL, which helps us recognize the IBM software in your estate. And this is what enables us to make sure that we're including the relevant software installations in our license consumption. It's also worth noting that Flexera is a partner with IBM, and this allows us access to the ILMT content libraries as an example. So we are very much an eligible replacement for ILMT, and we have the additional benefits of being able to count and represent your license entitlement and optimize that license consumption. Now, the additional key part is that not only once you've got that Flexera inventory agent deployed in your estate, it's not only going to be relevant and helpful for managing IBM subcapacity and IBM licensing generally, but also that agent's going to enable you to gather your Oracle database inventory. It's going to be able to gather your SQL Server, your Windows Server, Core Infrastructure Service Suite. That agent can also help us manage a number of different other, publishers, Red Hat, SUSE. As you can see here, we've also got capabilities and functionality within our toolset to help you manage ServiceNow and VMware, etc.
Perfect. Now, look, appreciate Toby and the detail you've gone through and explaining how we manage IBM. It's fantastic. And one of those case studies that really drive home the point that what Toby is talking about is DBS up in Singapore. Fantastic customer of ours up on the on-premise environment. For us has been proactively using our solution here to manage both Oracle and IBM. So one of the things that they found was really driving home the proactiveness of gathering the data, processing the data, getting to a point where they understand those true ups, and the likes of Oracle and IBM actually using and accepting that data as part of their renewal and audit processes. So fantastic case study online. The links down the bottom were added in the chat as well, but to just see what DBS has done with Flexera technologies. So today, look, I just want to leave this on. Please reach out to myself via the QR code on the screen in front of you. So if you're concerned about how you're managing IBM for those audits and you want to learn more about what we're doing to help you get a demonstration of the capabilities that we have in the platform, understand a little bit more about how we can help manage those contracts and entitlements and getting out to the spectrum of inventory that is out there in your environments, please let us know. We're happy to reach out, and look, we'll start to answer any questions that you may have throughout the chat, and we'll go into Q&A if there's any today. We'll answer those for you. So we'll leave it there, and we'll appreciate your time today.